Wouldst thou like to live deliciously? It's not quite as seductive in my accent, I think. In a very short amount of time, Robert Eggers has become one of the most unique and skilled voices within cinema. Releasing 3 films so far, literally all of them I consider to be back-to-back beautiful masterpieces, he's also established himself as quite the original voice in horror. Though his most recent title, The Northman, is a historical action outing, his next film on the slate is a remake of Nosferatu, meaning that, assuming that film definitely goes ahead, of his first 4 entries into cinema, only one of them won't be in the horror genre. Dude has a little bit of taste in the terror variety, it seems. His first 2 films, The Witch and The Lighthouse, which, now that I'm saying that out loud, it actually kind of sounds like its own horror movie, are 2 of my favourite horror movies of the past decade. Though I could honestly flip a coin on this one as to which I want to talk about, as I think they're both seriously incredible pieces of art with a lot of interesting elements to look at, I've decided to cover The Witch today out of the 2 of them, because, you know, it's witchy. Just makes it a little bit more Halloweeny, doesn't it? No one was going out trick-or-treating as lighthouse keepers when I was a kid. So let's just keep it in season with this one. Plus, it's kind of nice to start on his debut feature effort, because then you really get to see how this guy just kind of stormed out the gate on his first attempt and hit the floor running. The Witch is this amazing atmospheric folk horror tale set in a vividly realised 17th century New England. Eggers both directed and wrote the film, and one of the reasons it feels so legitimate in its setting is he actually grew up in New England himself, specifically the state of New Hampshire, and as a child was incredibly fascinated by the concept of witches, having grown up in a place so steeped in their folklore and mythology. He'd often frequently visit the Pilmouth plantation as a schoolboy, which if you don't know what that is, it's basically this big living museum that's replicated the original settlement of the 17th century English colonists, now known as the Pilgrims. Taking that fascination and driving it into a script and setting, Eggers crafted his very own witchy nightmare. Dubbed a New England folk tale, The Witch is set in the 1630s and follows Thomasin, the eldest daughter in a puritanical family of English settlers, consisting of her mother Catherine, her younger brother Caleb, 2 young twins, a boy and a girl named Jonas and Mercy, her baby brother Samuel, and led by her patriarchal father William. The family are part of a settlers community, but are banished by the Puritans they reside with because the father, get this, is too puritanical for the Puritans. You have to understand how radically God-fearing you have to be a bit too scared of and devoted to him for these guys. They were just like all dandy with the God vibes, having a godly good time, and he comes storming in like, "We doth not be worshipping the Lord enough. We are a world of sinners who shall be judged." And they're just like, dude, chill. You're like up here. Love that you love God. Great stuff, but maybe just bring it down a couple notches, yeah? Chill your beans? And he's old-fashioned and stubborn and all like, "Thou beans shall not be chilling on this day, sinners!" And they're just like, "Oh, dude, you're so... please, just fuck off." And so the family are dramatically exiled, the doors of the settlement shutting on them as Thomasin watches on with what seems to be a hollow sadness and fear. The family discover an open area near a large isolated forest, and it looks like everything is going to be just grand, because they could totally build a farm and a life here. I am curious about the film's choice of music though at the discovery of such a blessing. I'm sure it's nothing. The family get to work on crafting a little farm for themselves, and it seems like things aren't really going so bad for a moment, all things considered. Could do a lot worse after permanent banishment from your community than having this little house and farm thing going for you. Unfortunately for them though, things quickly take a turn when the film blindsides you with one of its most chilling and harrowing moments. As Thomasin watches over her adorable little baby brother Samuel, the two enjoy a bonding moment playing a game of peekaboo, when
Boo!
"Oh God!" In a seemingly impossible way, the baby disappears, and while Thomason runs into the forest to look for him, it's all too late. A witch has the child. And the film pulls no punches, making the major inciting incident that takes us into the witchy horror of this film be that the first casualty of the movie is a literal baby. Jesus, Eggers. Dude. Though thankfully you don't see the child's on-screen death, there's enough horrible implications here with lingering shots of the witch holding a knife to him and imagery of the ointment she makes him into that your skin very much crawls at the thought of what's just happened. And this kind of sets up the tone for what The Witch is all about from here on out. It's not a film where things yell boo. The horror instead comes from the slow burn of a family torn apart by loss and torment, divided between the hell of a religious fundamentalism that drives wedges between them through paranoia and the nightmare of outside forces ruining their lives in wicked ways. As the film continues, we watch the family just try to survive this grief, isolation and misery, but things only seem to get worse and worse every moment. Tensions rise between Catherine and her daughter over the loss of Samuel. William has to secretly sell prized family heirlooms in order to get them the hunting equipment they need to keep going, only to have his efforts to get them food fall apart in his face. Their crops keep harvesting in a rotten and inedible manner, and worst of all, Samuel isn't the only child that's going to go missing under strange circumstances. The Witch is a film that carefully builds upon itself with a creeping slow downfall for this party of puritanicals. Its 1.5 hour runtime acts as a drip feed of folkloric terror that creeps into its central characters like shadows through the woods, and it achieves this through Eggers' now infamous level of craft and eye for detail. Though I think it's an out-and-out masterpiece, the film is actually quite divisive. Not just for its crawling approach to its horror, which doesn't sit well with every audience, but also for its strict insistence on historical accuracy that permeates its every frame, right down to the point where even its script is delivered in Old English dialect with heavy British accents. Right from the first frame, Ralph Ineson's booming and bassy Yorkshire delivery fills the speakers with the line, "What went..." I can't do it. That was stupid. "What went we out into this wilderness to find, leaving our country, kindred, our fathers' houses? We have travailed a vast ocean. For what?" There are times when its language and delivery could be considered borderline impenetrable. However, while your mileage may vary, if you're anything like me, you'll find the authenticity of all of the these, thous and thines truly immersive, transporting you to a moody, atmospheric and fascinatingly historical period of time that, to my mind, never before and never since has it been explored in such a painstakingly handcrafted feeling way. Even the title of the film, stylized as The Vivitch, speaks to the credibility of its setting, with Eggers pulling that spelling from a Jacobean-era pamphlet on witchcraft. Right from the outset, the goal for Eggers was always this incredibly realistic portrayal of this New England period. If you ever read the actual script that he wrote for the film, it opens with a note that reads, "To the reader, this is a tale of witchcraft, told as a simple family of 17th century New England might have believed it to be. All of their folkloric and religious beliefs in this film are true. It was inspired by various folk tales, fairy tales, and recorded accounts, journals, diaries, court records, etc., of historical witches and possessions from New England and Western Europe before the Salem outbreak in 1692. Much of the dialogue, in fact, comes directly from those sources in order to effectively depict this world in which ordinary people understood supernatural occurrences to be an expected part of life. It is essential that all aspects of the film are to be carried out with utter naturalism. The characters must appear as real farmers, not actors with dirty faces. Even the supernatural elements must be photographed as realistically as possible. Yet, with all this authenticity and realism, it is still a folktale, a dream, a nightmare from the past. Eggers could not have been more successful in achieving this goal. The world feels lived in and real, almost because it pretty much is. So determined was Eggers for authenticity that everything you see in the film is 100% accurate to the time period. The farm the family create was built exclusively using materials and construction methods available in the time period, bringing in a thatcher and carpenter trained on these techniques. The music, which is this absolutely haunting score of terrifying howls and noise mapped to delicate minimalist ambience and wrote by Mark Corvin on unusual instruments like the waterphone, and a Swedish thing I'm afraid I have no idea how to pronounce, Nyckelharp, maybe, was created specifically under the condition that modern electronic instruments were completely banned from the production so as to not give the film any artificial quality. The costumes by Linda Muir were painstakingly researched using 35 books from a series on Elizabethan and early Stuart England clothing and created to be period accurate from wool, linen and hemp. The production team worked with museums and experts on 17th century British agriculture, and perhaps most insane of all, no artificial light was used, with everything shot being lit by the naturally grey and cloudy skies, or the lights of candles. Something that looks incredible in the final production, by the way, so long as you are watching it on a proper screen without glare and not a phone or something where you would lose a lot of the details to the dark. And it was something that proved to make production a stressful logistical nightmare. With Eggers explaining in one interview, we were constantly tying the schedule up in knots because of weather. We needed it to be gloomy, and we couldn't betray that. And the crew was really upset all the time because the schedule was just bonkers. The authenticity proved a difficult task in other ways too, as Eggers went on to say. The scene where Thomasin is doing laundry and she's getting water, even that location was very difficult to get to. There was a marsh and the dolly was sinking the whole time. And then of course, the goats. I was afraid we didn't have the film because the goats were so difficult to work with. Originally, there were supposed to be 3 goats with 3 different skills. A bucking goat, a rearing goat, and a goat that was good at standing. But we ended up having only 1 goat, whose skills were napping or attacking Ralph Ineson. That said, the meticulous effort paid off to create a film that looked, sounded, and felt flawless in its execution of its setting. Despite the fact that due to tax incentives, production had to take place in Canada and not on location in New England as Eggers had wanted, you would never be able to tell. A beautiful picture is only half the battle though, and all the effort to look and sound legitimate is in vain if it ends up being done in service of nothing. Thankfully, The Witch is an extremely rewarding and compelling film if you allow yourself to be immersed in its storytelling style and get on its wavelength. The movie is abundant with layered thematic threads and offers so much in the way of analysis and takeaways on subjects like religious fanaticism, patriarchal systems, and the ever-persistent conflict of differing worldviews and ideologies. It is interesting that, if you truly trace events back to their narrative source, the family's downfall comes as a result of the father William taking a stubborn stance of ideological fundamentalism. If they do not get banished as a result of his prideful purity testing of his own community, then none of the events of the movie happen. Looked at through a modern lens, this idea is not too dissimilar to the fanaticism of today, with huge numbers of people exiling themselves from their communities, their friends and family by bottling themselves up in this cocoon of harmful ideology, becoming so wrapped up in its concepts that anyone who dare question it becomes a misguided sheep at best and an enemy at worst. Unrelated side note, what's your favourite letter of the alphabet? Mine isn't Q. The extra layer of subtext here is that it's incredibly ironic that William rebels against the religious settlers he resides with because of a perceived lack of commitment to God from his perspective, considering them sinners who shall be judged for not having done enough in his name, yet in doing so, he displays the sin of pride. His stubborn self-righteousness not just throwing him to a doomed fate, but also his innocent family. Something he would rather allow to happen than take his words back. And last time I checked, pride wasn't something the big man upstairs he's claiming to be so loyal to was all that much of a fan of. Throughout the film, we see how much this religious fanaticism poisons the family just as much as their outside tormentor. Thomasin is so racked with guilt at the mere thought of having mundane earthly desires like not wanting to work every second of the day, that when she prays for forgiveness, she says, "I know I deserve all shame and misery in this life and everlasting hellfire." Do you? Jesus! Their religious paranoia and fear of there being a witch and a devil amongst them causes more damage to their family than the witch herself, tearing apart their love with accusations and delusions. First, Thomasin is accused, then the twins, then even the goat at one point, until so little is known about who can be trusted that all 4 are boarded up in the goat's shed. This paranoia eats away at them all, to the point that when an incident will occur where they need to lean on one another, such as with the passing of Caleb, instead of helping each other, immediately the accusations begin to fly, usually with Thomason receiving the worst of things, becoming the de facto target for all of the blame for the loss of any children and being the subject of much of the family's doubt and mistrust, something that descends into a hellish insanity by the end of the movie, with her own mother accusing her of seducing her brother and causing his death. And this descent into despair and madness is captured with some truly fantastic performances all around. Anya Taylor-Joy as Thomason does a lot in this film with her facial expressions, communicating so much emotion without dialogue. But for me, the real standout and under-celebrated performance of the whole thing goes to Caleb, portrayed by Harvey Scrimshaw, who, in an absolute standout moment of the film, has an extended death in which, after a bout of sickness caused by an encounter with the witch, he seems to have an insane moment of religious ecstasy before spontaneously passing. And holy shit can this kid act! Like, you have to remember, this is a child performing this scene. A scene that would be demanding for any credible actor at any age, and this kid executes it flawlessly, selling this rapturous moment of delirium in Old English with all the acting capability of an Oscar winner. Unbelievable stuff. I'm going to get into major ending spoilers now to continue our analysis, but to go back briefly to the discussion of religious fundamentalism and ideology, it is interesting that throughout the film, her father's puritanical beliefs offer Thomason nothing but suspicion, misery and isolation. But by contrast, the movie's villain, who is revealed in the third act to actually be a very much present devil in their midst, turns out it actually was the goat Black Phillip the whole time. I knew he was suspicious. That'll be why he kept battering Ralph off camera. Also, they totally foreshadow this throughout the movie, with the twins chanting a little worship song in his honour and saying he speaks to them. This devil they fear, however, offers Thomason something entirely different from her family's harsh accusation and judgment. In a, if you'll pardon the pun, delicious scene, the devil reveals himself when Thomason, as the only surviving member of the family with nowhere left to go, beseeches him to speak to her. The whole thing plays out in a totally gripping manner. Thomason framed in a candlelit close-up, she faces forward as the shot is held with her back to total darkness, while a whispering, seductive voice offers her salvation. In the background, shadowed by the darkness so much that you may not even see him depending on your screen, Black Phillip moves as a man. His identity a mystery to us, but his soft voice lulling us into a sort of compelling trance. His screen time in this truly revealed manner is extremely brief, but so impactful and engrossing, he becomes an incredible and memorable presence in these mere moments. And it is in this small, profound scene that Black Phillip offers Thomason a different life, a freedom which she never had under her family. The life of a witch they spent the whole movie accusing her of being. And in scenes I can't properly show because everybody is butt naked and YouTube are as puritanical about that stuff as the settlers of this movie, she walks into the woods, shed of the clothes that symbolised her whole life, joins a naked coven of dancing witches who ascend into the air, and in the final shot, which I can show as all of the bits YouTube frown upon are out of frame, Thomason ascends with them, a look of ecstatic joy plastered over her face for the first time. Now if you look at this scene one way, this is liberation. Thomason is being given a freedom she had never had, a community and acceptance with a new family who do not hold her to such impossible religious standards. She receives the independence and individuality she could only have dreamt of in her previous life. And chances are, had she actually dreamt of it then, she would have probably prayed for forgiveness for having such thoughts the very next day. But on the other hand, it could be seen as her leaving one extreme ideology for another, as if so poisoned by this need to subscribe to an extreme faith, she merely trades into different structures. The image of her joy is, after all, undercut by that doom-like soundtrack. However, it should also be noted that we as the audience are examining this sound from the perspective of a normal society, much like how the Pilgrims were the normal society to this narrative. What sounds like a nightmare to us may sound like salvation to a culture of witches so different and free from our own. I also think Thomason's final expression somewhat mirrors Caleb's religious ecstasy death rattle, further drawing parallels between the religious aspects of these two competing ideologies. However, it should be noted that his ecstasy ended with a falling descent into death, and hers with a levitation into new life. Whatever reading you have of the film's themes and how it approaches them, it's clear that The Witch is a rich tapestry for interpretation, a totally different kind of horror that sells its terror not through its monsters, but through the vivid portrait of a world and society it portrays torn asunder by religious extremes. It's such a profoundly unique horror film that for those who resonated with it, it's left a monumental impact on them, including upcoming filmmaker MJ Gilbertson, who I brought on today to discuss their thoughts on The Witch, as they made an incredible horror film with Bella Ramsey recently, in which the visual style was heavily influenced by Eggers' efforts here. Hi, welcome to the channel.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So you made a film, Requiem. It's fantastic, by the way. I gave it a watch. And it took a lot of visual inspiration from Robert Eggers' work. What is it about The Witch specifically that you find so visually interesting?
It's like a really beautiful looking film. I think it has taken influence from Francisco Goya because like every shot looks like it could be a painting. The Witch has like a really beautiful blue kind of color palette, I think, in the outside scenes. I think we went for like something a bit warmer. It was also a really good reference for us because we were it's the same time period, right? So it's like we can take a lot of reference for that, but just from a lighting perspective, it all feels very natural, you know. It's like candlelit or like moonlit. So it was just like a very good one for us to reference, really.
What do you think makes The Witch's horror work, and how do you perceive The Witch's horror to be different from its contemporaries?
The power in it really is the ambiguity. Like I was reading a comment today in which someone put, it looks like there's like ergo on the crops, and ergo was this like type of fungi that would grow and also cause hallucinations, and they think that it was like a massive part of like what caused the witch trials and the kind of hysteria that surrounded it. And I think like I'm saying, that the power in The Witch really is like its ambiguity, because you don't know for sure like what is going on. I also think part of its power is that it's really simple. It's very contained. It is a family drama. It's all these like family tensions building up over the course of the film, and there's like some like just really like weird unsettling moments in it as well. Like again, it's like ambiguous. You don't really get answers for it, and that like challenges you, I think.
Is there any projects you're working on at the moment you would like to talk about? And is there any places you would like people to follow you to keep up with what you're doing?
I'm pretty much only really on Instagram or Vimeo, but my Instagram is MJ Gilbertson. I'm working on my feature film at the minute. It's not a horror, it's a thriller, but I don't want to give too much away. But I think whereas like with my other projects, I've looked at gender binary and feeling unsafe in the environments that you live in. My feature is more about like non-binary identity and like freedom. So I think that's kind of where I want to go next. I absolutely love horror though, so I'm sure at some point I'll spin back around to it when it's the right story.
Thank you so much for joining me for this video, Em. You can catch my full conversation with them at the link in the description to learn more about their film Requiem, what it was like working with Bella Ramsey, their thoughts on The Witch, and just their filmmaking journey in general. And that's all we have time for today. With that, we have wrapped up yet another episode of this Wholesome Halloween celebration of horror marathon. So once again, before we depart, let me just remind you all once more of this month's big announcements. Did you know that this month's videos are in support of Trans Lifeline? 100% of ad revenue, donations at the donation buttons on my videos, and my Patreon income for this month will be going direct to the charity, as well as all profits from the Drambles shirt, seen here in mock-up form. Also, unrelated to the Trans Lifeline charity efforts, did you know a couple of other cool things are happening right now? Firstly, if I'm still in the competition at the time of this vid's release, I am running once more to be this year's Face of Horror. You can vote for me once every day for free, or buy more votes if you're so inclined, and doing so will help the B+ Foundation, which funds childhood cancer research. And finally, did you know that I am accredited advisor on the next entry in the smash hit In Search of Darkness series? This documentary saga is making its first foray into the 90s decade, and as an advisor, I'm able to offer a 10% discount on this film. I'm thrilled to be working with the In Search of Darkness team. It's going to be a banger. Check all this out and more at the links in the description below. Other than that, don't forget to like, Like, comment, subscribe to my only Dans at the red button below, hit the bell so you don't miss the next vid, and I have been Dan Drambles. You're watching Wholesome Halloween 3, a celebration of horror, and I will see you all again for another episode, same time tomorrow.